They actually don't know the facts. Whenever I do something, it's like that's so
Eso es para que la gente me escuche. Sí. Okay, fantastic. Okay. I think it might also like that. Yeah, that was next.
Are we live streaming there?
If I want to.
Mason, the camera is right there, so you need to...
Start with the prayer.
Right now, that's what I'm showing. So we just can't walk
I want to
in.
welcome all of you who are here, the hundreds that are here, and also those on live stream. Many were able to come because of COVID or other things, so distance, whatever. So welcome. Some of you are watching on live stream, some of you will watch this later. It will be recorded on our YouTube and Facebook channels as well. Let's begin with a prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Come, the Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of thy faithful. Enkindle in them the fire of thy love. Send forth thy Spirit, and they shall be renewed. Let us pray. O God, who dost instruct the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant us by that same Spirit to be truly wise, and ever to rejoice in his consolation when we say Christ.
Amen.
O Sacred Heart of Jesus,
Have mercy on us.
Immaculate Heart of Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Francis,
Pray for us.
Holy Guardian Angels,
Pray for us.
the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This was Mason Friedenberg's idea. Mason founded a leadership council for adults. And so, Mason, tell us what your idea is.
Thank you, Father. Very gracious. We kind of put this together originally for our young adults, and then we had a workshop, kind of an impromptu workshop with Jose for our leadership team, and we thought it was really great and needed to be part of the whole parish and really beneficial for all of us. So we're really happy to have Jose out here. He came up from Southern California, Ventura area last night, and just really fired the Holy Spirit when Jose gets 10 years of experience evangelizing in different settings, in the workplace, in different workshops, different talks with various groups of people. So he's going to give us the practical tools we need to evangelize in the own settings of our lives, in the workplace, and our families, and what that really starts to look like for us. So, Jose, happy to have you, and welcome.
Awesome.
Thank you everybody for having me and for this opportunity to share with you some ways in which we can share the gospel. And I want to highlight here that it's sharing the gospel in a way that is comfortable for you and effective for building the kingdom of God. And especially these techniques are fantastic for very tricky situations. As in, you're in the office and you feel it's particularly, let's say, not welcoming of religious perspectives. These techniques are for you. You're looking forward, in a sense, to the next holiday, 4th of July, and I do air quotes because maybe there's some tension with a family member, and you feel the Lord is somewhat poking and prodding at you that, well, that's the family member you got to evangelize. Well, then these techniques are really fantastic for that. So without further ado, let's move to the next slide. So a little bit about me, something that really, my goal is to help others know and share God. In a sense, I feel the evangelization is somewhat incomplete if we just sort of bring people to church. I want people then to later bring other people to church. to share God with others. And how am I going about that? And it's like, I really want to share a thirst for evangelization as well as practical know-how. You can be hungry and be really excited about eating, and if you don't know how to cook, you're going to settle for fruit. And at the same time, you can cook really well, but if you don't want to eat, you won't do it. So today we're going to especially focus on the how to cook aspect of it. And I was just explaining to my new friend Michael that these techniques don't require a PhD in anything. They essentially require desire and openness. For many of these, it's once you see them, you can't unsee them. And where have I applied these? As Mason mentioned, universities, Fortune 500 companies, homeless ministry. One time, actually, I went to Yale School of Management, and it took about 8 months, essentially, to build rapport and just get people generally excited about perhaps the church in general. That when Easter Sunday rolled around, our house was filled with like 60 people or so, and I would say around 90% of them were like not even Christian. And to clarify, we didn't have like a bunnies and eggs Easter. At one point, I literally got up in front of everybody and said, hey, I believe that Jesus came to help you have better relationships with God, yourself, and with others. And, went through the gospel that way, and people listened to it. So, anywho, let's move on to the next slide. Now, the goal is, essentially God is the evangelist. And in the sense that true evangelization can only be done for God and through God. God is the source of all grace, etc. If you can imagine yourselves as stained glass, when light shines through stained glass in just the right way, it almost gains this 3D property. And when it gains that 3D property, even though the stained glass is far away from you, it's almost as if the stained glass is touching you through the light that shines through it. So if we say the light is God, then these techniques are really so that, we position it, maintain it well, and clean that stained glass, which is your life. Going to the next slide. All right. So here is an overview of the strategy I would encourage all of you to become familiar with when evangelizing. And before we get into the strategy itself, I just want to throw in some pros and cons to having a strategy. The pros is you have a framework to reference things, a way to think about things. The con is if you're employing it, and maybe it's with your brother, trying to evangelize him, and it's not working, you might get really frustrated and just throw the whole thing away. But at any rate, more times than not, having a general strategy or a framework to assess a problem is very helpful. Actually, and I think there are handouts on the table over there. Mariela, do you mind handing, or thank you, Marco. So Marco's going to hand out some handouts so that y'all can take notes. For the people watching at home, I will be repeating essentially some of the questions, so fear not. Actually, I'd like a handout too, so that I can follow along. Essentially, we're going to go through laser method. Laser method essentially illustrates how you can take certain actions within your daily life, within your communications, and within your intent so that you can evangelize with as little rejection as possible. The idea, in a sense, is this is evangelization for you. And if every time you cook, you touch the stove, and you get burned, I guarantee it, you're probably going to stop cooking. So in this sense, right, we're trying to evangelize such that you can protect your heart. Oh, sorry, I touched my. So that you can protect your heart, and at the same time protect the hearts of the other people whom you're evangelizing. Mariela, can I have a worksheet? Or Michael, thank you. And we're going to go through it. The L in laser is essentially living the Catholic life. Thank you. And by living the Catholic life, there's, I would argue, two main broad tenets that I would say cover like 95% of it. One is Catholicism alive. And by Catholicism alive, I mean the rosary is a concept, in a sense, until somebody prays it. And then it becomes alive. Even Mass, the most beautiful and complete prayer, in a sense, is a concept until until a group of people and a priest pray it. Gregorian chant, it's words on paper until it's chanted. So, in a sense, a part of living the Catholic life is having the traditions of the Church come alive through your actions. Then the second item is living as Catholics. By living as Catholics, essentially, it's those secular things, say cooking, playing sports, watching TV, etc., whereby, because you're a Catholic, there is a different twist to how you're doing it. There is importance within our faith, for example, to tell the truth. Therefore, when somebody watches a Catholic play a sport, you would suspect they would, let's say in soccer, they wouldn't die. Or when you're cooking, you might, another spin, instead of avoiding sin, when you're cooking, you might cook extra to give to others. So those are sort of the pillars in the living the Catholic life aspect of laser. I mentioned that because those two pillars are essentially the foundation to the rest of the strategy we're going to go through. Essentially, the strength of those pillars determine your capacity to share your passion for Christ. After going through that, we're going to go through the A in laser, and that's accepting others. Now, by accepting others, I do not mean that you should call sin not sin. Sin is still sin. What I do mean is that you will get certain communications techniques such that when you get hard sentences thrown at you, let's say at work or with family or etc., that you will be equipped to respond in a way that is both aligned with Catholic teaching and protects certain emotional aspects of the relationship. Then the next, the next two letters, the S and the E in laser, it's share and engage. By share and engage, we're going to go into some ways, some useful communication techniques to open the door to conversation. In a sense, your goal there is to open the door and leave it ajar, and if the other person wants to walk through it, they can. And after that, we're going to go into the repeat, the R. And I put that there somewhat jokingly, repeat later on, in that the magic of laser method is that you essentially bring or open up the topic of Catholicism in very short spurts, especially in the beginning. And the focus isn't on quantity, but quality. We'll get a little bit more into that later. So in short, this is the strategy. And are there any questions so far, philosophically? Any allergic reactions? Jose, why didn't you cite Thomas Aquinas in the first 10 minutes? No? Okay. Oh, over there, you're excited. What's your name? Tell the crowd.
Hi.
Pat? Okay.
Yes.
Pat.
Does it assume that people are already well catechized?
It assumes no catechesis or outright rage. And then, so let's say the worst part of the spectrum you can be is that the evangelizee is really angry, hates the church, or doesn't know anything about the church. So that's the end of the spectrum. These techniques will work for the person over here, up to and including like the person that's just like, why do I need to go to Mass every Sunday? I go 3 Sundays a month. So this is perfect for everybody. Father.
What are the two aspects of the L, living Catholic life? So could you repeat those? I didn't get those.
Yes. The idea is that there are certain actions we take that are explicitly sacred or holy, that come from the tradition of the church. As in, it would be strange for someone to confuse the rosary for anything other than Catholic. And then the other aspect, it's the secular things that we do that are informed by our faith. Yes.
So sacred and secular things, those are the two aspects, but doing the secular with the sacred dimension or purpose.
We do the sacred things so that the church tradition comes alive. So it's not just like this Wikipedia article in a sense. And then we do the secular things with love. Well, that's actually the first topic we're going to dive into. Thank you for that question. Or rather, I lied. I committed a sin. We'll have to meet later for confession. But the first topic we'll get into is why living the Catholic life is so important. Mason, next one. Okay, so presenting and sharing the Catholic life. Within the Gospels, Christ is pretty unambiguous, outright just so vocal about why we should follow him. And one of the reasons is we become alive. You look at the parable of the prodigal son, and you see the father talking with the son who had never left. And it's like, the son is like, why are we doing this? Why are we throwing this party? You never threw one for me. And the father says, because your brother was dead and has come back to life. When we look at the woman at the well, our Lord didn't say, you're going to have organic, locally sustained water. Now, I shop at Trader Joe's, so nothing against that sort of stuff. But what I mean is this water will give you eternal life. And that life comes with certain specific verbs. We look at Galatians, for example, and there are some clear verbs which are commensurate with death. Right? Acts of licentiousness, outspurts of anger, for example. And the flip side, you have other actions or sort of general categories that are a function of being alive. Joy comes to mind. Peace. So, in a sense, sharing, like living the Catholic life and then later sharing it with others is a lot of about what our faith is about. Also, in general, hopefully this method just makes you a happier in general individual. At least it's made my life better. So, anywho, any questions or protests? Going on to the next section, this is again designed for the hardest to evangelize folk. And in order to really sort of like open up the mind, I encourage y'all to get into what I like to call the imagination of God. When Paul was Saul, Ananias did not want to go evangelize Saul. Saul was blind, because that was post the vision with Christ. And the Lord says to Ananias, basically go to Saul. And Ananias says, no, do you know what he has done? And then our Lord says, go Ananias, for this man is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name before Gentiles, kings, and Israelites. And this phrase is not a phrase when we look at who Saul was, there's a reason in a sense why this phrase makes sense. Saul had Roman citizenship. He was a scholar in a sense, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. These were all languages that were necessary to be an effective communicator back in the day. He was a scholar of the scriptures, so he really did know the law quite well. And he had significant leadership experience. Going to the next slide. I mention that because there are so many Sauls in our lives. Can you just imagine if we went over a sales representative over to the faith? Like, my gosh, they are amazing at storytelling, generating appreciation, and they have determination. Essentially, that's what you call an A+ evangelist. Engineers, what if we get an engineer? They know how to scale things. They know how to execute and iterate. And then, what if we get a stay-at-home mom to come for the kingdom of the Lord? And essentially, the most important one I put there is like a cultural fomenter. Quite frequently, at least when I have conversations with stay-at-home moms, the conversation tends to be like, essentially, what type of culture are they trying to inculcate in their children? In essence, somebody who would just eat up the tradition of the church and figure out ways to share it. That said, I also want to highlight, we don't know who when we evangelize will become a Paul. Like, we might be thinking about a particular family member and have all these qualities in a sense we haven't identified. They could become an amazing evangelist. And if nothing else, right, you will have can you imagine if you win over a family member? Christmas is going to be different. Everything's going to be wild. So at any rate, this is my sales pitch to you. Consider winning souls over for the kingdom, and we might see an incredible transformation in the church. Any questions here? Allergic reactions? No. You smiled. No. Oh, wait. There you go. You go, ma'am. The one with the cool glasses.
So this is all wonderful, and family members, that's more doable, but at work, when talking about God is, can cost you jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're going to get to that, but that's my, if I even say that I'm Christian, I get ostracized, I get judged. And I'll say it anyway, but certainly not going to be, So I don't know if you're going to talk about that later on, but that's kind of the big,
Yeah, I get you. It's like, oh my gosh, what if I say, I get fired literally for saying the name of the Lord? Not in vain. So yeah, exactly. These methods were designed perhaps for your situation in particular. Any other questions or hesitations, ma'am?
How do you evangelize someone? He went to the seminary for 4 years to become a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, it's my own story. My son, 2 days before his 7th birthday, he brought my son in his boat, left him there for 5 minutes, then my son is drowned.
Oh my God.
Then my husband said, if there is a God, why did you let my son die?
Mm-hmm.
Now he is an atheist, he doesn't go to church, he doesn't believe in God anymore.
Mm-hmm.
How can you re-evangelize a man like that?
Yeah, in a sense, he's experienced a lot of hurt and pain, and I can hardly imagine what it would be like to lose a child. That said, these are very gentle. These are very gentle methods for yourself and for your husband. So I'm very excited to see what you think when we go through them. In essence, the summary is we will hint at when you are a Catholic, and in hinting at when you are a Catholic with other sort of sprinkles in it, if your husband is ever curious about it, he will go through the door. But that's the one-line summary. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to dig into the living the Catholic life. And the reason I mentioned this is that at least I have found that using this framework, these 2 pillars, are extremely helpful for determining where you could work on your life more so that you can become a much more effective evangelist. Sometimes your secular side needs work. Sometimes your sacred side needs work. Sometimes it's both. So now we will start with the living the Catholicism alive. So with Catholicism alive, essentially what it is again, the traditions of the church come alive because you do them. If you were to read about ancient Roman culture, it's not alive. It's in textbooks. So in a sense, it's part of being Catholic is digging into that treasure trove, which is the Catholic Church, and seeing which aspects of it you can implement within your life. We are blessed in that the church is like 2,000 years old, and if you add the Judaic tradition, it's like much older than that. So there is a lot to choose from. There are a number of reasons why you would pick, let's say, 5 things to do in a week. For the purposes of evangelization using laser method, I want to focus on which aspects of the church tradition, could be rosary, Gregorian chant, Latin Mass, etc. Write down which ones make you happy. That's like over here. Oh, go ahead, Michael. Oh, please write it down. Please write it down. So write down which ones make you happy, give you passion, give you joy. And again, for example, if you have a spiritual director, he might say something like, you should really do Stations of the Cross once a week. And you're like, I don't really want to do that, but I'm going to do it out of obedience. We're going to focus on the things that genuinely make you excited, happy, passion, peace, any of those, or any combination. We'll give that a second. Okay, and if you haven't been able to write something down, that is totally fine. We are here to find out, in a sense, what could be really good for you. And then the second, after you write that down, please write a 5 to 10 word sentence about why it makes you happy, joyful, passionate, whatever. So I'll go first. I love going to daily Mass because I feel so united with the Holy Family. And I'll do another one. I love evangelizing because it brings my friendships to much greater intimacy when we talk about God. Okay, cool. Do I have any volunteers to share, like, maybe one thing and why it makes them happy or passionate? Let's go, man.
I love going to daily Mass and receiving Christ in the Eucharist because it brings foundation to my day.
That's beautiful.
Can you repeat what he says, because we're having a hard time hearing in the back?
Mason said, I love going to daily Mass because it brings me foundation throughout the day. Any other volunteer? Yes. Oh, and may I have your name?
Oh, I'm Lori.
Lori, good to meet you.
So I love Mass because I learn the readings and the homilies, and then I was reading some grace from the
Yeah.
portion that I had as a foundation.
That's fantastic. Lori said she loves daily Mass because she gets grace from daily communion.
Well, that, yeah, and also I'm learning and growing through the readings and the homilies.
And she learns and grows through the readings. Fantastic. One more volunteer. May I have your name, ma'am?
Gabriela.
Gabriela? Mucho gusto.
So I also love the Mass, the Latin Mass, because it is so reverent and because it speaks of the character and awesomeness of God.
You love the Latin Mass because it's very reverent and speaks to the awesomeness of God.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to ask a volunteer who, let's say, is particularly self-aware emotionally. Anybody here? Like if I asked you what emotions you were feeling, would you know? Nobody? No. Mason, I'm going to pick on you. What was it? Yeah, I need a volunteer who can really effectively describe their emotions. Anybody?
I wonder if anyone wants to talk, we can use this as a microphone.
Oh, thank you, Maria. Okay, well, I'm just going to ask you, Mason. Hearing your fellow friends describe what they love about the church tradition, how did that feel?
Hearing my fellow Catholics and community speak about their joys brought me a lot of gratitude.
Yeah, it felt great.
Because I get to witness how they grow and what brings them.
Exactly. That's what it's like when somebody describes something passionately, like intimately, with joy, right? So you wrote this one sentence for this one thing which brings you happiness within the church tradition. If you have other things, whether Gregorian chant or Lectio Divina, etc., that bring you joy, I strongly encourage you to have a one-liner in your pocket. And we're going to get into just why that is so powerful in the share and engage section. Next one. Okay. So, living as Catholics. I'm going to touch a lot of third rails here. Like, this is a semi-safe space. So, some examples of this are like cooking, reading, sports, driving. Like, when you're driving, could somebody tell that you're a Catholic? Okay, thank you, Gabriela. We need more people like you. Sometimes I'm like putting change lane left, and then it's just like a signal to say speed up and cut me off. Like, this is what I mean, right? If people see you doing something that is secular, hopefully they get the sense that you're a Catholic. Okay. So I want to know, of all the secular things you do, let's answer these questions. Like, which secular actions do you tend to do with love? I know out there are some people that bake with love. They purposely bake 12 cookies when they only want to eat 2, so they can give 10 to like other people. I know some people that go out of their way to teach engineers how to dance merengue, because we need to spread joy and life in the world. That's me. So at any rate, write some of the secular things you do that are hobbies, and write down which ones you reflex, in a sense, to do with love. Okay, and while you're tying that one up, think about secular things you do quite frequently that are absolutely not loving, or could become more loving. And here I'm going to touch third rails. Driving, parenting, what else? Maybe YouTubing. Somebody watch your YouTube history, could they tell you're Catholic? Nah, I mean, don't feel bad if you don't watch Word on Fire every day. But more like when people see things, it's like, oh, I didn't know Catholics watch that. I guess it's a church I can join. Like, you know what I mean? So, could people tell you're a Catholic through that? Okay, so we are at the end of the L, living the Catholic life. Oh, go ahead, Mason.
Does having a rosary on your rearview mirror count as driving as a Catholic?
Absolutely not. Cut someone off and they're like, I know which church I'm not going to. So, ending our section here and living the Catholic life, this is the engine. If you want your evangelization to be a Ferrari, then this is what you work on. This is the hardest thing. And I will say, and I'm not just pandering, that Star of the Sea in general, I would say, has signs of strong engine. Very learned priest in the traditions of the church. People who are like non-priests, lay, who are learned in traditions of the church. Also activities in secular items. So there's lots of signs to say that this parish has some, that is really truly living the Catholic life. And if you feel that for some of these questions, it's like, oh man, I'm just a hateful person, I do lots of secular things and nothing but love, then you have lots of mentors here who could say, hey, maybe you could try this. Or maybe, you know, this isn't like, you don't need a PhD to think like, oh, maybe I could play sports this way, right? And in terms of if you didn't have an answer for how can I bring Catholicism alive, the Catholic Church tradition alive, then there are tons of resources here to essentially find out what, I hate to call it a hobby, but what hobby or activity you could do from the 2,000-year history of the church will legitimately bring you replenishment in life. Any questions before we tie off this out, this section? No? Okay. Next one. So now we're going to get into accepting others. This is the most controversial, or the one that carries the most emotion of like, is Jose going to tell me that sin isn't sin? No. Sin is sin. And virtue is virtue. We have to call a spade a spade. When we call it and who calls it is a different matter. So it helps if we generally categorize the emotions we can bring about in another person in what I like to call respect, like, and love. When you interact with somebody and they feel good, we can broadly, I would argue, you can broadly categorize those as respect. Like, oh, I think this person is not going to prevent me from taking certain actions or decisions. Or they're not going to try to change my mind. Like, literally this person is affirming me. And love, this person is going to do things with me. There might be other definitions for love, for like, and respect. However, ultimately, at least for the purposes of laser method, categorizing them this way makes it very helpful because ultimately you might say, I can probably respect 99.9999% of the humans I've met. As in, not actively trying to convince them they're wrong, etc. And I can at least find one thing that I really like in 97% of humans. And in terms of love, which is doing verbs together, say cooking together, going to a concert together, going to mass together, all of us have 24 hours in a day, which ultimately mean that it is not possible to engender that specific feeling in everybody we meet. I have friends from high school that I really, really love and appreciate, and I talk with them like for 30 minutes every 2 weeks or so. So at any rate, this is going to make a lot more sense as we go through specific examples. And before we go to those examples, please note, respect is the easiest one to do. By that I mean it really requires the least amount of neurons, like CPU. And with that, it's a lot easier to not get tongue-tied, to not be like, oh my goodness, how do I respond to this without essentially making myself go to confession later. And somewhat sadly, because respect is so rare nowadays, it is extremely powerful. Like, just go on Google News, you will read all sorts of disrespect for people you have never met. And probably for people that the reporter has never met. In fact, my first job out of college was essentially to read the news 40% of the time. So yeah, respect is powerful. And it can be an ethereal topic, however, much more manageable when we define it as avoiding convincing others that they're wrong and avoiding taking actions that prevent people from doing something. Examples. Sam says, let's just pick one, Bush or Gore. Sam says Gore will bring about a just prosperity in America. How do you respond to that? Using respect, like, and love as a framework, you might say something like, you want America to be prosperous and just. Nobody has to go to confession over that. And you're certainly not making fun of Sam or anything like that. A likeful response is essentially, I agree, a prosperous America is important. And a response full of love. And again, this love that I'm defining as something we do together is you can essentially say, I will campaign with you. Or you could say something like, I want to read a book about Gore with you. Mind you, any of these responses, particularly the love one, are signs of immense emotional strength. And to the extent that you can do these, really illustrate just how strong your living the Catholic life is. Because if God is just satisfying, gosh, then you can definitely at least say, Sam, you really care about America being prosperous and just. And if you're just so confident in your relationship with God, you might even have the ability to say something like, affirm, something affirming. In the loveful response, again, maybe you don't have the time to read a book about Gore. And therefore, if you disagree with Gore's policies, then you might feel like you're going against your values. This gets back to the topic of, in terms of defining love as a verb, we're not called to love everybody. Because literally, there's only 24 hours in a day. Any questions here? Lori.
The last one too, like, what was hard about that one too is like I don't have the desire to read a book about Gore. I mean, that one, I can see where it would cause, would be an act of love to read it and then parse it out.
Exactly. And honestly, the way I like to illustrate these sorts of statements is that there's so much history behind this sentence for that individual that if you were to read this book for any reason, especially if you really disagree with Gore, it would be to figure out how to get to that deeper layer in the heart. Why does this person care about this particular policy? Almost always it has to do with family. Any additional questions or observations? Mariela?
So I have a comment. I really like your examples because usually when you make a comment, people will focus on their political belief, likes or dislikes, where with that, you are literally like listening to the person, and it is about, America to be prosperous or, any kind of statement. So inspiring to hear, that there are many beautiful ways to just listen to the real message, not to what you think. So you remove from that. Mm-hmm. You kind of work with the person with that comment.
Exactly. And listening to others is just like such a Christly thing. In a sense, it's almost like the Word became flesh, almost to have 2 ears. Christ listens to us all the time in prayer. And whenever you feel listened to, I imagine, at least me, when I feel listened to, it feels great. By the way, thank you all for listening to me. Really appreciate that. Next one. Respect, like, and love works with any age group. Jane is a toddler, points at a dog in a picture book, and smiles at you. What is a respectful response? Respectful response is to point at the dog Jane is pointing at and smile back at her. Likeful response, telling Jane you are so attentive. And a loveful response, Jane, let's look at this picture book together. I love this example because one, you can do this with anybody. And two, it is actually sometimes harder to do a respect, like, and love response when somebody tells you something they really like. You're talking with somebody who, let's say, is a Saul or a Mary Magdalene, and they didn't really say anything that offends you. In fact, they said they like chocolate chip ice cream or something. But in your head, you're like, I don't know how to respond. She doesn't like my church, whatever. So here you go. I like chocolate chip ice cream too. Or ice cream in general is enjoyable. Something like that. Any questions here regarding Jane? Gabriela?
So affirming people, it's okay, but how far can you do the affirmation? I mean, I've tried for 15 years with people that were Catholic at one point, and then they became Buddhist, for example. And I have loved them and still do, their children, and I don't want to brag on anything that I've done, but in any case, when I visit them, they are in the same spot.
Yeah.
And it's sad to me. And so there's a point in my life that I had to say to God, Lord, I love all the friends that you have given me. They're wonderful, but they don't believe in you. Can you please put me in a group of people that do believe? Because it actually take away from you as well. And so affirming people is good. It is absolutely good because we're all brothers and sisters. But I feel like at some point you need to draw the line.
Yes, there's a point where you do need to draw the line, particularly if, let's say, they're living a debaucherous lifestyle and for whatever reason they drag you along. And you let yourself be dragged along. And I'd like to highlight that respect, like, and love, this framework, is for what to do in a conversation where you just feel like you're in a hot seat, or when you're trying to build rapport with somebody for Christ. We will definitely get into what are the mechanics, or how would I explain what are logical steps one can make for a person to develop an emotional connection with the church. Like the stuff we went over just before about, like, what aspects of the church tradition bring you peace. You have an emotional connection. And we can certainly take steps to encourage that. Okay. Okay, we're getting to the good stuff. So Jordan says religion is unhelpful because it lacks logic. And I know everybody here probably disagrees with this. So respectful response, what is it? You really value logic. Like, you're really grasping at your inner therapist. And then a likeful response is living a logical and coherent life is important. I think most of us could say that. And a loveful response. Do you have any books about this? I'd love to read it with you. This happened to me, actually. A bunch of these happened to me. And going to the next one. I made this one specifically for this parish. Blake says, if you look at history, Latin is a vestige of colonial oppression. And it's like, how do you react to this? And essentially, it's like, you really value justice. That one is especially a good respectful response because you're almost changing the topic. You're now moving away regarding why Latin is so bad to discussing the topic of justice. You can give an affirming response, like, yes, studying history is important. And then you can give a loveful response. Essentially, I want to hear more of what you're saying. If they bite in the last one, if they vent, that is fantastic. Because people generally vent to people they trust. So, again, the goal isn't to convince somebody that they're wrong. The goal, at least with respect, love, and love, is to manage the conversation such that they view you as a friend. Any questions regarding this one or others? Nope? Okay. So we're going to break into teams. Or actually, we'll go through... actually, could you go back? Thank you. So we're going to break into teams. Just pick a friend. And essentially, I want person A to take one of the things that they wrote about what brings them passion from the church tradition. And I want person B to respond with a respectful response, a likeful response, or a response full of love. Okay? So if you don't have a team member, I will be that for you.
You want to go first? I really enjoy High Mass on Sunday because it feels there's a sense of timelessness when I'm at Sunday Mass. Not very cool. So the elf brings us peace.
Okay.
So people won't be able to see that. Right now I'm just pointing at that.
Oh, do you want to do one together? And that way they can see us practice?
What was the question? I was like focused on that.
Oh, yeah.
What was the question?
Essentially, one of us will share something that we love about the church tradition, and the other person will respond in respect, like, or love.
Okay, so I will tell you what I love about the church tradition, and then you will. Okay, let me just think something. And so we'll talk right there, or?
Yeah, if you're comfortable.
Sure. Let me think just quickly. Give me a hint. Like what about?
Like, if you think of something that is Catholic that makes you really happy, or be at peace, or passionate, something generally good. What is that?
Oh, I have so many things. One thing that I love is that to be able to be in the church in front of just be in the church and pray quietly. You know, the churches that are open, but not everyone offers that, so it will be a controversial point. I love something like praying the rosary because it's a way that I feel like I kind of relate to Virgin Mary and learn more about the life of Christ. How he started Annunciation, how he died, and all of that. So it brings me, it brings more attention to what the life of Jesus. When I pray that and the love that his father had. Traditions that I love when we celebrate the masses and we have a beautiful choir music. Yeah. So things like that, I think. Or
I think for this example, let's stick with the rosary, okay. and we'll just focus on why you love it so much. Does it sound good? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Okay. Okay. If you can switch, so the other person gets a turn.
Okay.
Ready? Okay.
Yes.
So everybody, we're going to demonstrate for the people at home how this might go. Mariela, go ahead.
So one of the things that I would like to share is that I like praying the rosary, and I like it praying it by myself because it gives me time to reflect about Jesus' life, the beginning and his end, the way that he gave his life for us, and also praying in community because when I do that, I feel like there are many Catholics, we are together in this, and one of my most amazing experiences was when I went to visit Fatima and I saw the candlelight procession. I could not believe just having like 300-400 people praying and walking together. I felt like I was in heaven, and I love it.
Oh, that's awesome. So Mariela, you love the rosary because it helps you really understand Christ's life more. And when you pray it in community, it almost makes you feel like you're in heaven.
Yes, because you don't feel alone anymore. You feel like you are walking together with all the people of God, and that's inspiring. Beautiful.
It is inspiring. Wow. I really like the rosary too. I'd love for us to pray the rosary sometime.
I would love to pray with you.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. So that's how you do it. Again, somebody who's willing to share emotions. Marco, are you really willing to? When you saw Mariela and I interact, how did that feel for you?
It feels really good. It feels similar to Marielle's feeling on community. You feel there's community that when you see community connecting around you, you also feel a part of that community and a draw to it.
Exactly, right. Okay. So do we have a volunteer for somebody who wants to try a respectful, likeful, loveful response for the first time? Anybody? I'm going to tell you about a fun fact about me and then you can react to it.
Sure.
Okay, come on up. All right, man, you have a cheat sheet over there?
Yeah.
I'm going to throw you a curveball. Ready?
Uh-oh.
I love making origami for my kids because I don't have to clean up and it's like a really fun way to make them toys.
You must really enjoy making your children happy through art projects.
That's right. Way to go. All right. That's good. That's it. Good job.
Okay.
Cool. Do we have another volunteer? Somebody? No? Okay. Let's see. What time is it now? Okay, it's 2:39. Do people feel okay to keep on going, or would somebody like break? No? Okay. So let's go on to the next section, which is sharing and engaging. So living the Catholic life is essentially determines which sorts of actions you can or actually before going on to that one, we're going to go to some essentially parachutes. Silence is a fourth option. Somebody says something, you are just so dumbfounded. Like, oh my goodness, are we really talking about this? It is totally okay to give yourself seconds to think about it, or maybe just not even respond. And in some situations, particularly when you're sitting at a table of 5 or 7 people, silence can have the happy effect of accidentally engendering respect. Feelings of respect, I should say. That said, silence is not a good way to practice, it's not practice for respectful response, likeful response, loveful response. At the end of the day, at some point you have to try it. And it is perfectly okay to try it with your best friends at first. The fun thing about respect, like, and love is that, again, it will work in the absolute worst relationship. It will also work in the absolute best relationships. In any sort of conversation. So keep that in mind. And going to the next one. And another fifth option is a mirroring question. So again, if for whatever reason Jordan, instead of saying, what was it? Instead of saying religion is unhelpful because it lacks logic, if Jordan then just says, I hate religion, you might say something like, you hate religion? Asking a question, or Jordan, just try to get a little bit more than those 3 words. And people tend to be pretty deep, there's some real stuff going on in almost everything they do. There's a particular reason why people really like coffee, for example, or have a particular bag, or really enjoy this particular YouTube channel, for example. So getting past those 3 word sentences will help you get to those emotional connections. Okay. Sharing and engaging. Sharing and engaging is where the rubber hits the road regarding living a Catholic life. In the sense of your life gives you stuff to talk about. And if you can't talk about Christ, then it shows you really should develop more your Catholicism alive. If people just sort of see you can't contribute to society in a sense, for lack of a better term, then maybe that needs work too. So let's go on to these specific examples and things will make more sense. This is my favorite way to open the door to a Catholic conversation. Mason, would you mind asking me how my day was?
Jose, how was your day?
Mason, my day started out great. I made breakfast for my kids, worked on a PowerPoint for a presentation I'm really excited for, went to Latin Mass, and even managed to play a little bit with my oldest. How was your day? Okay, so that sentence is extremely powerful. A few reasons why. It baked into the mechanics of that sentence is respect. Mason, I could know nothing about him, but he could walk through any of these doors. He could ask me what I made for them. He could ask me how I played with my oldest. He could ask me what my presentation was about. He could ask me, Latin Mass, what is that? I've never eaten that before. He could ask me all sorts of things. So that's one. The second aspect of why this sentence is just so powerful is that if Mason is just I hate Catholics, or something like that, if you see it in his face, you could simply respond with, how was your day? And then we can pivot onto him. Third reason, you are identifying as a Catholic. The mere act of self-identification of Catholic implies a bunch of things. One, you like it enough to identify as it. 2, there is nothing to be ashamed about. You're talking about your day. And especially nowadays in the sense that it's not like people are being crucified on the street. For the most part, this is generally a safe thing to say. I did a rosary today. And then lastly, you don't know how this other person is going to take this statement. If they walk through the Catholic door, you have now just gone through the response of if somebody says, why do you like the rosary? Ask Mariela, right? She can now say, it really helps me feel, it really empowers me to learn more about what I love the most, and I feel like I'm in a deep community. Powerful sentence, full stop. Any questions regarding daily accomplishments and goals list? This particularly is one of the things where it's once you see it, you can't unsee it. Even if you don't talk about anything at all that related to Christ in that 60-minute coffee chat, for example, this is fantastic evangelization. Oh my goodness. That person might even Google their nearest church that night. Okay, any questions about this? Comments?
That's a great opportunity any Monday or any day you go back to work. Somebody will say, hey, that's a great opportunity. Put the word out there and just let it go.
Yes, sir.
Especially if you have a circle of people that you see every Monday morning.
Exactly. And may I have your name, sir?
Mike.
Mike. Oh, awesome. Everybody, that's Mike. He's very respectful of children and parents while they're walking the street. Anyway, he was going to park, and then my kids and I were like going to go, but like he graciously stopped before they became past tense. So thank you. Mason.
So I think this is good, and I think Lori asked earlier when maybe there's fear, even to bring up something in passing like that, about mentioning your faith. What are different ways you can either practice or gain that courage to just take that step?
Exactly. And sometimes, Mason, I'm going to take it a step further. Sometimes it takes courage to only say a little bit about your faith. Like serious restraint, like I don't know anything about this person, or I definitely know this person hates the faith, or anything like that. We might have just read Catholic Answers. This article will totally help you convince somebody that this thing is wrong. And to that I say, just say no. You want people to Google this stuff on their own and call you at midnight crying. Like, I just read Catholic Answers and it says I've been wrong my whole life. It's like, that's when you want to have the conversation. But up to here, right, you are just trying to like say, I'm Catholic, and if you want to talk about it, I can hold your hand. Okay, going to the next one. The next one is really good too. And I think this one is extremely powerful for this parish. Catholic name dropping. In the middle of the conversation, right, somebody says, I just love working. It brings me a lot of fulfillment. And then at that point, you might say something like, oh my goodness, there's this Christian organization you might want to learn about, Opus Dei. They like talk about the sanctification of work all day. Just leave it at that. If they want to walk through the door, they will. If they don't, you can talk about your topics. I have done this to great effect with like people that are so solid that I thought it was just impossible for them to have any interest in faith. And the reason why this one is extremely powerful is because it basically checks off all the emotions of respect, like, and love. Respect in the sense you're implying you're not going to change their mind by what work is fulfilling. Like, because you're essentially saying, that is a good thing. And then love, because you're giving them resources for how they can become better at that which they love. Any questions regarding Catholic name dropping? And if you can't do this one because it's like, I just don't know anything about the church, then feel free to talk to anybody in this parish because people know so much about the bishop that you will surely find something to share later on. Next one. Oh, sorry about that. I talk with my hands, not with my mouth. So, at any rate, now we're going to get to the repeat section. This really talks to, especially Gabriela's point earlier, of like, where do I draw the line? And I would say, instead of drawing a line, draw a staircase.
Draw what?
A staircase.
A staircase.
A ladder. Anything that builds. Because as I mentioned earlier, evangelization doesn't work if it's not for God. Particularly helpful here is the line of John the Baptist. He must increase, I must decrease. Your ultimate goal, I would argue, is to help that other person find that emotional connection with the Lord. Implicit of that is essentially you kind of want to show them the church tradition and help them get to a point where if you run away or walk away or move to Korea or anything like that, that person will still be going to Mass because they have found fulfillment there. Next slide. So, in the very short term, and by short term I mean for the purposes of the coffee chat or the dinner you're having with this family member or maybe the drinks you're having with your boss, I would say open the door once, maybe twice every 60 minutes. And if it's a 3-hour dinner, at the most you are pushing it with 3 times. Because again, the magic in this laundry list is you're identifying as Catholic, you're saying there's nothing wrong with that, I'm Catholic and this is a great thing, and you're respecting them to go through that. Remember, God is the ultimate evangelist, right? It's not like, oh, I couldn't force them to love the Eucharist. God is the one who's evangelizing, so just let them open the door. And the way I want to make this super clear is I want you all to think about your employer or your number one client saying, hey Michael, I want to lower your salary by 10%.
You might want to really save money.
Well, that's a good one. So your employer basically said, like, you ask them, what are your goals? Or you ask them, what are your goals? And they're like, I want to improve morale, eat pizza, and lower everybody's salaries 10%. And you're having dinner with this person. Like, if they say it once, you're like, I'm still willing to stay in this dinner. If they say it twice, you'll be like, stop saying it. By the third time, you might even say something like, I want to raise. Like, so that's exactly how people feel when you're trying to just force that Catholic door open. Any questions about that? Anybody want to lower their salary? I'm very curious. I've given this talk before and nobody said yes.
How about yours?
My salary?
Just kidding.
I do not want to lower my salary. I will try to get better quality. So anyways. Thank you for participating, by the way. I love you. Next one. Okay, so that was the short term. And now we're going to get into long term. That ladder, that staircase, complementary invitations. Complementary invitations is that Catholicism alive together. Father, do you mind if I put you on the spot? Is celebrating Mass by yourself different emotionally than celebrating it with a congregation?
Yes.
Of course.
It is different. We are trying to get people to do Catholicism alive together. Mariela just illustrated in front of everybody that, in a sense, Rosary is beneficial to her as an individual, for sure. She learns more about Christ. Likewise, the Rosary is also very valuable when she prays it as a community. Ultimately, we want people to develop that emotional connection with the church tradition. And it's very hard to do that without the mentality of Catholicism alive together. A pitfall I have found, communities or parishes in general that have a very strong Catholicism alive, it's like the Mass is so beautiful, it's just people will be drawn to it invariably. Cathedrals are so beautiful. Just somebody will walk in and the cathedral itself will essentially evangelize the person. And sorta, like, we are social beings. If there were no cathedrals on earth, Christ's commission for us to evangelize, to make disciples of all nations, would still be a thing. We need to be in it. And as we have seen with parochial schooling, etc., we have sent people to Catholic school, and that doesn't necessarily turn out to be, that doesn't necessarily become a guarantor of their faith life in the future. That relationship, are we willing to live Catholicism alive together, is the question. I have this progression here. Literally going to go over here. You have coffee with somebody you like. Then you maybe go on a picnic. Then maybe you go dancing. Then maybe you decide to introduce that person to your family. This is a logical progression for developing a reasonable emotional connection with somebody. Another reasonable way to progress emotionally is somebody, maybe they don't know anything about the church, just knows that there are Catholics out there in the world, but not of the world. And then just one day they might meet a Mason or a Marco or a Michael, and they might hang out for a beer once a week, or once a month, or once every 2 months. And from that, they might go to a theology on tap. And from that, they might go to a social at a parish. Somebody knowing that there are Catholics and all of a sudden becoming a daily Mass adherent would be unusual. Somebody going on a coffee date and then proposing to somebody else. If that other person said yes, that would be unusual. Any questions here? Allergic reactions? So, Gabriela, to the question, the statement you made earlier of like, where do you draw the line? It's the answer to that is let's think strategically about whether we're giving this person too much Catholicism or not giving them Catholicism in small enough bite sizes so that in the future they might be willing to take a meal. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so before we get into like generating this menu for that special person in your mind, the understanding the concept of synergy is very helpful. Essentially, again, the goal is to bring life to the other person through the church tradition. Like where the rubber hits the road, you're not Catholic unless you're doing Catholic things. So the synergy, right, is essentially creating value through a specific action. Like I might meet Marco for like hot cocoa, and there I get the value of friendship, and then so that's a type of synergy. Now, regarding these synergies, right, they're based on similarities and differences typically, which is why it is so heartbreaking when a church makes an executive decision, let's say, to become less traditional. Latin Mass is very different from any sort of event out there. And I'm not saying that anything that isn't Mass is a sin. You can go to a concert, that could be really good. But like the Latin Mass is so different that if somebody interacts with it, their life will be different. If your life isn't different from entering into a church, then there is actually no reason to stay. You will just leave because then you will go to some other restaurant. So any questions regarding that? And I think it will become more clear as we get into like specifics. Next one. So synergy. It is so important to be genuine. So actually start with yourself. Start with asking yourself, what do you like to do? Literally, write it down. Think about what you like to do. And then along with that, think of that special person in your life. Might be your son, might be your co-worker, might be your neighbor. Also ask yourself, what does this person generally like to do? So let's take 2 minutes right now. Or 2 seconds. So an example might be something like, what I might write down is I like to make origami, and my children like to play with toys. Somebody might say, I like Gregorian chants, and the person they want to evangelize is a Europhile. They like classical European history. Okay, and let's go to the next slide. So you have this list of things. So then we take it to the next level. Literally, we go from I and them to we. What could we do together? And that we, at face value, at first is just you and the other person. But thereafter, now that you start getting the brain juices flowing, in terms of what type of person this is and what they like to do, then you start asking yourself, what could both of us enjoy doing together that is unambiguously of the Catholic tradition? I literally met somebody who would hang out with their friend when they were like little, like 7. And their friend was Hindu. Just for whatever reason, she liked doing the rosary. At any rate, understanding the secular hobbies of the other person will give you a hint of just what of the Catholic tradition they might like. Let's go to the next one. And then lastly, the most important aspect is it has to be easy. And easy is the term because maybe that person will only tolerate for the conversation opening the door, like Catholic name dropping once. Okay, that's fine. And here I go into some aspects of what I mean by easy. Something that takes very little effort, something that doesn't take a lot of time, something that doesn't take a lot of training. In a sense, if we consider, at least for this parish, Latin Mass requires training. Knowing how to navigate it in the book, etc., what to expect. At the very least, it's definitely a more acquired taste because it is so different from what the world provides. And by world, it could be like the evil world, or it could just be just in general secular society. So here's some thoughts about maybe some things you could do with friends. And before you invite them to attend, per se, the Latin Mass, if you think they're not there yet, you might say, hey, wanna do Shemayan chants? Shemay, for those of you who don't know, is a beer brewed by monks. The church has a very lengthy and Olympic gold level history in producing delicious alcohol. And with Shemayan chants, you could hang out and talk and just drink for a little bit. And then maybe for 30 minutes of that, let's say 2-hour hangout time, you might have somebody who's an expert in Gregorian chant, or at least very knowledgeable in it, say, hey, we're going to look at these 2 stanzas or something like that of Gregorian chant. We're going to listen to it for like 5 minutes, and then go into why this is so beautiful. And that would be especially effective, I would say, or that could be more effective than, let's say, bringing somebody who has no understanding of Catholicism, let's say, all the way to like an Easter Sunday Byzantine liturgy. That would be a tour de force. You could also do Tantum Ergo with a friend. The Tantum Ergo is a very beautiful poem, in a sense. And it's not particularly lengthy. So maybe you could have coffee with somebody who is themselves maybe a very literary person, who loves literature, and just say, hey, do you want to read this with me? And we can discuss it from a poetic perspective. And that way, you're building a foundation. Instead of taking them to like a 2-hour event, essentially, you're encouraging them to interact with the church for like, let's say 5 to 15 minutes. And that is the equivalent of like having coffee with somebody you might marry in the future. Any questions here? Allergic reactions, Jose, you're wrong. Catholic answer said something else. Michael, you are laughing. I want to know what's going on.
Well, you're a pro, so I can't very well say anything against what you're saying.
Well, but feel free.
Well, I know if I could.
Oh, okay. Any comments? Curious to know, what do you think of Shemayan chants?
Fabulous.
Okay. One last item. On the topic of synergy, we often focus on we need to be different. And sometimes, right, it's more like, let's be different. By that I mean, there are certain synergies that are secular that people are craving for. Lots of people move to San Francisco from other cities and are essentially removed from their community. They are essentially, like, it would be such a work of charity to become that person's grandparent, in a sense. Like, there's this new person in Star of the Sea, and it doesn't matter whether they're Catholic or not. If they're new to San Francisco, I guarantee you they would love to go over your house for dinner and have that sort of like older person, younger person relationship. Intergenerational relationships is a type of synergy that people really crave for, and oftentimes is something that the church can readily provide. Other sorts of differences might include like culture, for example, people from different cultures, different work backgrounds. Just because, let's say, I'm a consultant doesn't mean that I shouldn't hang out with people who are artists. In fact, having those different interactions provide a really powerful synergy whereby you can have a more fulfilling, rich life. Yes, ma'am.
I think one, it's important that it's less effort, less amount of time, is the gift of hospitality comes to my mind in here.
Yeah.
And I think that, and it works for anybody. You could also do ecumenical, people from different beliefs, and sharing a meal is a very neutral way of making contact and invitations, I think.
Yeah, sharing a meal is fantastic.
Yeah.
And the emphasis is sharing. Food will not convert somebody. At least it shouldn't. You sitting with somebody, seeing them, that is very powerful. I think we've gone through like basically everything. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, good. So thank you everybody for joining. Essentially what Mason, Marco, and I have agreed to is that following today, there are opportunities for you to continue interacting with me if you haven't had enough. And there are some options, really open to feedback we can discuss afterwards. There are certain Bible meditations we can do. I like to call the narrative of the Holy Family. And essentially it's looking at Jesus, Mary, and Joseph in a way that sort of lets us see how we might practically change how we view ourselves. In a good way. Like, I hope nobody becomes a greater sinner from studying Joseph. So that's one option. And the other one is laser coaching. If you're like, Jose, I'm intrigued by respect, like, and love, but I don't know, I need you to help me practice that, then you are certainly able to practice that with me. Or if you're wondering, like, I'm really having trouble understanding, like, creating a complimentary invitation plan or menu for this person, then we can chat. I love brainstorming and innovating. So that's it. I'm going to pass it back to Mason.
Thanks so much everyone for coming. Hopefully you learned something. We're really grateful for Jose being here and sharing his toolkit. And I know for us in the young adult group, it's already started to create really practical scenarios for us to evangelize other young adults. So we hope the same for you, and happy to connect you with Jose for more coaching and workshops. So thank you, Father Arlo.
Thank you, Mason. Thank you, Jose. And thank you, Mariella, for live streaming. And thanks to all for coming. Sorry we didn't have heat in here. I'll work out for the next one. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.